The phone buzzed in Marcus's coat pocket at exactly 11:47 p.m. on December 23rd, and when he pulled it out, with cleaning solution still wet on his fingers, he saw a message from his boss, Victoria Ashford, that made his breath catch. I wish someone would see me, not the title, not the corner office, just me, scared and so tired of being alone. Marcus stood frozen in the empty executive hallway of Ashford and Klein Financial, the vacuum cleaner humming beside him, reading those words over and over, knowing immediately this wasn't meant for him, knowing she'd be horrified when she realized what she'd done, but also recognizing something achingly familiar in that confession because he'd felt invisible for years. The single black father who mopped floors and emptied trash bins while raising his 7-year-old daughter Zoe, alone after his wife passed. The man people looked through rather than at, and now here was Victoria Ashford, the woman whose heels clicked like thunder down these marble halls, the CEO everyone feared and no one really knew, revealing a loneliness that matched his own. He stared at his phone, his thumb hovering over the keyboard, knowing he should pretend he never saw it, knowing that's what she'd want. But something in him, maybe the part that understood what it meant to be unseen, maybe the part his late wife Lauren had loved most, the part that always chose kindness, even when it cost him, made him type back, Ms. Ashford, I think you sent this to me by mistake, but I want you to know I see you, and you're not as alone as you think. He sent it before he could reconsider, then stood there in the dim hallway with his heart pounding, half expecting to be fired by morning, but instead, 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed again. Oh God, Marcus, I'm so embarrassed, please delete that. Ty was supposed to send it to. Actually, I don't even know who I was going to send it to. I don't have anyone to send it to, and that's pathetic, isn't it? Marcus felt his chest tighten because he heard his own echo in her words. And he typed back, it's not pathetic, it's honest, and honest is brave. And then, because it was late and he was tired, and sometimes exhaustion makes people more truthful than they intend to be, he added, I know about alone, Ms. Ashford. I've been raising my daughter by myself for 3 years, and some nights after she's asleep, the quiet gets so loud, I can't stand it. He watched the 3 dots appear and disappear, and finally her message came. I didn't know you had a daughter, I'm ashamed to say. I didn't know anything about you except that you keep this building cleaner than it has any right to be. What's her name? And just like that, at nearly midnight, on the 23rd of December, Marcus found himself telling his boss about Zoe, about her gap-toothed smile and her obsession with dinosaurs, about how she wanted a microscope for Christmas so she could see the invisible world, about how he'd been working double shifts for 2 months to afford it plus the winter coat she needed, about how Lauren would have known exactly how to braid her hair, but he was still learning, and Zoe never complained, even when he made it lopsided. Victoria wrote back, she sounds wonderful. You sound like an amazing father. And then, after a pause, can I ask you something? That thing you just did, when I sent you my messy, broken moment, and you didn't judge it, or use it against me. How did you know to do that? Marcus smiled at his phone, thinking of Lauren, of how she'd taught him that everyone carries invisible weight, and he typed, because people did it for me when I was broken, and because I think maybe the only thing that really matters is whether we see each other's humanity. And Victoria responded with something he never expected. Tell me your real wish. Marcus, not the surface one, the one underneath. He stood there for a long moment, the vacuum cleaner still humming, the Christmas lights from the office windows casting red and green shadows across the empty corridor, and he let himself be honest. I wish Zoe could have a Christmas like other kids, with a tree and presents and magic, but more than that, I wish she didn't have to grow up so fast. I wish she didn't hear me crying sometimes at night. I wish I was enough for her. And when he sent it, he felt both exposed and somehow lighter. And Victoria's response came quickly. You are enough. I can tell that just from how you talk about Herbert, Marcus. Come to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. please. I want to talk to you about something. The next morning, Christmas Eve, Marcus dropped Zoe at his neighbor, Mrs. Chen's apartment. The same woman who watched her every morning before school and asked for nothing. But sometimes he left groceries by her door anyway. And he rode the bus to the Ashford and Klein building with his stomach in knots, still wearing his work uniform because it was the most professional thing he owned. And when he knocked on Victoria's office door at exactly 9, he barely recognized the woman who answered. She wasn't wearing her usual sharp suit and severe expression. Instead, she was in a simple sweater, her hair down, her eyes red-rimmed, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept, and she gestured him in with a small, uncertain smile that made her look younger and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. "Thank you for coming," she said, and her voice was different too, softer, missing the executive clip he was used to. "I wasn't sure you would after I dumped all that on you last night," and Marcus shook his head. "You didn't dump anything, you were human." That's allowed, and something in her face crumpled a little before she pulled it back together. "Sit, please," she said, pointing to the leather chair across from her desk, and when he sat, she didn't go behind the desk to the power position. Instead, she took the chair beside him, equal height, equal ground, and she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything, okay?" Marcus nodded, his hands folded in his lap, and Victoria took a breath. "I built this company from nothing," she began. "I was 23, ambitious, angry at the world for telling me I couldn't, and I turned that anger into success, into this empire. And somewhere along the way I forgot why I was building it, had this idea that once I reached a certain level, once I had enough money and power and respect, I'd finally feel, I don't know, complete, safe, worthy. But I'm 41 now, and I have everything I thought I wanted, and I've never felt more empty." She looked at Marcus, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Last night I was sitting in my penthouse with a bottle of wine, looking at my contacts, trying to find someone to wish Merry Christmas to, and I realized I've spent 20 years building walls so high that no one can reach me, and now I'm trapped inside them. That text I sent you, I'd typed it out to send to my sister, but we haven't spoken in 6 years because I missed her wedding for a merger meeting, and I don't even have her number anymore. So I scrolled through my contacts and landed on you, and I think some part of me knew you'd understand." Marcus felt his throat tighten because he did understand. Maybe not the penthouse and the empire, but the walls and the loneliness. And he said gently, "Why am I here, Miss Ashford?" She smiled sadly. "Victoria, please, after last night, I think we can use first names, and then, you're here because you reminded me what matters, and because I want to help you give your daughter the Christmas you described. But more than that," she paused, struggling with the words, "I was hoping maybe you'd help me with something too." Victoria stood and walked to her desk, pulling out a folder, and when she came back, she handed it to Marcus with shaking hands. "This is a proposal I've been working on since 3 a.m., she said. "I want to create a foundation, a real one, not just a tax write-off. Something that helps single parents, like you, who are working themselves to the bone and still can't get ahead childcare assistance, education grants, emergency funds, real support, and I want you to help me build it. To tell me what people actually need instead of what I assume they need from my ivory tower." Marcus opened the folder, scanning pages of notes and budget projections and mission statements, all written in Victoria's precise handwriting, and he felt something expand in his chest. "I don't understand," he said. "Why me? You're not just anything," Victoria interrupted, her voice fierce. "You're a father who works 2 jobs and still makes time to learn to braid hair. You're a man who responded to a stranger's midnight breakdown with kindness instead of judgment. You're someone who sees invisible things. That's exactly who should be building this with me." Marcus looked up at her. This powerful woman who was looking at him like he mattered, really mattered. And he felt tears burn behind his eyes. "I don't have any qualifications," he said, but Victoria shook her head. "You have the only qualification that counts. You know what it's like. You've lived it. And you still have enough heart left to care about someone else's pain that's worth more than any degree." She sat forward, her hands clasped together. "I know this is sudden, and I know you have no reason to trust me, but Marcus, I'm asking you to take a leap with me. I'll pay you a real salary, full benefits, and the foundation will cover childcare for Zoe, so you don't have to work nights anymore. I'm asking you to help me turn my privilege into purpose, and in return, maybe you can help me find my way back to being human again." Marcus sat in stunned silence, his mind racing, and finally he asked, "What changed between yesterday, when I was invisible, and today when I'm someone you want to build a foundation with?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears that finally spilled over. "You were never invisible, Marcus. I was just blinded last night when you saw me. Really saw me in my worst moment, and you didn't turn away." Her voice broke. "You gave me something I haven't had in years, and I realized that's what I've been wishing for. Not someone to impress or negotiate with, or keep at arm's length, but someone who sees the scared kid underneath all this, and doesn't run you." Asked me what changed. "You did, Marcus. You changed everything by being kind when you didn't have to be." The afternoon of Christmas Eve, Marcus brought Zoe to Victoria's penthouse, and he watched his daughter's eyes go wide as she took in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-dusted city. The Christmas lights twinkling across the skyline like fallen stars, and Victoria knelt down to Zoe's level, her expensive sweater touching the floor, and said, "Hi Zoe, I'm Victoria. Your dad told me you like dinosaurs." Zoe nodded, suddenly shy, and Victoria smiled a real smile that transformed her whole face. "Me too," she said. "When I was your age, I wanted to be a paleontologist. Did you know that?" Zoe's eyes lit up. "Really? What's your favorite dinosaur?" And just like that, the two of them were deep in conversation about velociraptors and triceratops while Marcus stood by, his heart doing something complicated in his chest as he watched Victoria give his daughter the kind of attention most adults never bothered with, asking real questions and listening to the answers like they mattered. "Zoe," Victoria said after a while, "I have something for you, if it's okay with your dad." And she looked up at Marcus, her expression asking permission, and when he nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak, she stood and walked to her hall closet, returning with a wrapped box that made Zoe gasp. "Your dad mentioned you wanted to see the invisible world," Victoria said softly, handing over the package, "and I thought maybe this could help." And when Zoe tore open the paper to reveal a professional-grade microscope, the kind Marcus could never have afforded, even with his double shifts, his daughter's squeal of joy pierced something in his chest, and he had to turn away, blinking hard. "There's more," Victoria said quietly, and she handed Marcus an envelope, and inside was a check that made his knees weak enough to cover 3 months of rent, Zoe's winter coat, Christmas, and then some, but more than that. There was a contract, an actual employment offer, with a salary that was triple what he made cleaning, with health insurance and childcare, and a title that read, Director of Community Outreach, Ashford Foundation. "I can't," Marcus whispered, his voice thick. "This is too much. I can't." But Victoria took his hands in hers, and her grip was warm and steady and real. "You can," she said, "and you will, because Zoe deserves a father who doesn't have to work himself into the ground, and I deserve a chance to build something that matters." And Marcus, her voice dropped to almost a whisper, "I haven't felt this alive, this hopeful, since before I built my first wall, and that's because of you, because you reminded me that success without connection is just a prettier kind of prison." Marcus looked at this woman, this stranger who 12 hours ago had accidentally sent him her loneliest moment, and he saw her clearly, not the CEO, not the intimidating boss, but Victoria. Scared and hopeful, and reaching out across the divide that separated their worlds, and he squeezed her hands and said, "Okay." They spent Christmas Eve together, the three of them, and it was strange and wonderful, and nothing like Marcus expected. Victoria ordered Chinese food because she admitted she'd never learned to cook, and they ate it on her pristine white couch while Zoe examined drops of soy sauce under her new microscope, narrating her discoveries with the kind of joy that made both adults smile until their faces hurt. And at some point, Victoria started talking about her sister, about the wedding she'd missed and the niece and nephew she'd never met. And Marcus listened and asked gentle questions until she was crying and laughing at the same time. And she said, "I'm going to call her. I'm terrified, but I'm going to do it." And Marcus said, "Fear means it matters." And she nodded like he'd just given her permission for something she'd been denying herself for years. Later, after Zoe fell asleep on the couch, her hand still clutching a slide of fabric under the microscope, Victoria and Marcus stood by the windows watching the snow fall over the city, and she said quietly, "Can I tell you my real wish now?" And Marcus turned to her, seeing the vulnerability in her face, the walls coming down brick by brick, and he said, "Tell me your real wish," echoing the question she'd asked him the night before. Victoria took a shaky breath. "I wish I could go back and tell my 23-year-old self that she's enough already, that she doesn't have to prove anything, that the empire she's about to build will cost her everyone she loves. And maybe if I can't go back, I can at least go forward differently. I can build something with people instead of walls between them. I can." She stopped, struggling. "I can let someone see me and not run away from it." Marcus felt his own walls trembling, the ones he'd built around his grief and his struggle, and he said, "I see you, Victoria, and you don't have to run." And when she turned to him with tears on her cheeks, he did something that surprised them. Both he hugged her, this woman who'd been his untouchable boss just yesterday, and she stiffened for only a moment before she wrapped her arms around him and held on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. And they stood like that, two lonely people who'd found each other by accident, while the snow fell and the city sparkled, and Zoe slept peacefully on the couch. And something fundamental shifted in both of them. Christmas morning, Marcus woke up in Victoria's guest room. She'd insisted they stay rather than navigate the buses on Christmas Eve, and he found her in the kitchen, staring at her phone with a mixture of terror and hope on her face. "I'm about to call her," she said when she saw him. "My sister? I'm about to. Oh God, what if she doesn't answer? What if she hates me?" And Marcus poured her a cup of coffee and said, "Then, at least you tried. And trying is how we become brave." And he took Zoe into the living room to give Victoria privacy. And 10 minutes later, she emerged with mascara running down her face and a smile that could have lit the whole building. And she said, she answered, "Marcus." She answered, and she cried, and I cried, and I'm going to meet my niece and nephew next week. I'm going to. She couldn't finish. Just stood there crying and smiling. And Zoe, with the emotional intelligence that kids sometimes have in spades, walked over and hugged Victoria's legs and said, "It's okay to cry when you're happy. My dad does it all the time." And Victoria laughed through her tears and scooped Zoe up. And Marcus had to look away again because the sight of them together was doing dangerous things to his carefully guarded heart. They spent the day in pajamas, which Victoria admitted she hadn't done since she was a child. And they watched Zoe examine everything she could find under the microscope. And Victoria taught her about cells and bacteria with the kind of enthusiasm that revealed the little girl who'd once dreamed of being a scientist. And Marcus told stories about Lauren, about how she'd wanted Zoe to be curious about the world, about how she'd made him promise to let their daughter ask questions and explore, and never dim her light to fit someone else's expectations. And Victoria listened like every word was precious, and she said, "She sounds like she was extraordinary." And Marcus said, "She was, and she'd like you, I think." Because you're trying to be brave, and she always said that was the most important thing. In the afternoon, Victoria said, I want to show you something, and she led them to her study, where she'd been working on the foundation plans, and she and Marcus spent hours talking about structure and mission and how to actually help people instead of just throwing money at problems. And Zoe drew pictures of dinosaurs at Victoria's desk, and it felt like family, like the kind of collaboration and connection that feeds the soul. And Marcus realized this was the first time since Lauren died that he'd felt like himself, like the man he used to be, before grief and exhaustion had worn him down to just surviving. As evening approached, Victoria said, I need to tell you both something, and her voice was nervous. And she sat down across from Marcus, while Zoe colored beside them, and she said, this foundation, this new direction, it's not charity, Marcus. It's not me trying to ease my guilt or buy my way into heaven. It's survival. I was drowning. I was so lost. And I didn't even realize it until you responded to that accidental text with kindness. Until you saw me as human instead of as a title. And it woke something up in me that I'd thought was dead. She looked at Zoe, then back at Marcus. What I'm trying to say is that you didn't just accept a job. You saved my life. And I need you to know that. I need you to understand that this isn't me rescuing you. This is mutual. This is us pulling each other out of our separate kinds of drowning. And Marcus felt his eyes burn because he understood exactly what she meant. He'd been drowning too. In bills and exhaustion, and the loneliness of being the only parent, the only one responsible, the only one who'd see if he disappeared. And Victoria's offer hadn't just been a job. It had been a lifeline, proof that he was visible after all. That his struggles and his heart and his humanity were worth seeing. I know, he said quietly, I know it's mutual. I feel it too. And Victoria reached across the space between them and took his hand. And it wasn't romantic. Not exactly. It was something deeper and more fundamental. It was recognition. Two souls who'd been invisible in different ways, finding each other in the dark and choosing to be seen. Tell me your real wish, Marcus said again, soft enough that Zoe wouldn't hear. And Victoria smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. My real wish is that this is real, that tomorrow I don't wake up and go back to being the person I was. That I can hold on to this feeling of being connected and human and part of something bigger than my own ambition, she said. And maybe my wish is that Zoe gets to grow up knowing she's not alone, that her dad has support and community, and that she has people in her corner who see how special she is. And she looked at Marcus with such raw honesty that he couldn't look away. That's my wish too, he whispered. And Victoria, thank you. For seeing us, for letting us see you, for being brave enough to send that text, even if it was an accident. And she laughed, watery and real, and said, best mistake I ever made. Before they left that night, Zoe already half asleep against Marcus's shoulder, Victoria said, wait, and she went to her bedroom, returning with a photo album Marcus had never seen, and she opened it to a page that showed a young girl, maybe 9 or 10, with wild hair and a gap-toothed grin, kneeling in dirt beside what looked like a dig site, holding a fossil with the kind of joy that radiated off the page. That's me, Victoria said, before I decided dreams were impractical. Before I built the armor, I found that album last night after our texts, and I stared at that picture for an hour, trying to remember what it felt like to be her, to want something just because it made me happy, not because it proved anything to anyone. And she touched the photo gently, like it might disappear. When I saw Zoe today, the way she looked at that microscope, the way she asks questions without being afraid of looking stupid, she reminded me of this girl, and I realized I've spent 20 years trying to bury her, trying to prove she wasn't enough, when really, she was the best version of me I ever was. And she looked up at Marcus with eyes that were tired and hopeful, and achingly vulnerable. I don't know how to be her again, she admitted. I don't know how to undo 20 years of walls and fear, but I want to try, and I think having you and Zoe in my life might help me remember." And Marcus shifted Zoe in his arms and said, "You don't have to undo anything, Victoria. You just have to move forward. And you don't have to do it alone anymore. None of us do." Victoria smiled, and it was the most genuine expression he'd seen on her face, and she walked them to the door. And before they left, she hugged them both, careful not to wake Zoe, and she whispered, "Merry Christmas, Marcus. Thank you for answering my wish." And he whispered back, "Merry Christmas, Victoria. Thank you for granting mine." And when they stepped out into the snowy night, Marcus felt lighter than he had in 3 years. Like maybe the world wasn't quite as heavy as he'd thought. Like maybe there were still people who could see each other across the divides of class and race and circumstance and choose connection anyway. The foundation launched in February, and Marcus found himself in a role he'd never imagined, interviewing single parents and grandparents, raising grandkids, and anyone who'd fallen through society's cracks, listening to their stories and building programs that actually addressed their needs. Childcare, yes, but also car repairs and medical bills and birthday presents and the 1,000 small emergencies that could topple a precarious life. And Victoria was there beside him, learning to listen instead of direct, asking questions instead of assuming answers. And Marcus watched her transform from the intimidating CEO into someone softer and stronger at the same time. Someone who could admit when she didn't know something. Someone who could cry at the stories they heard and let that grief fuel action instead of building walls against it. They worked together most days, and Zoe came to the office after school, doing homework in the Foundation's library and charming everyone she met with her questions about how the world worked. And Victoria taught her about science and business, while Marcus taught her about empathy and resilience, and they became an unlikely family, the three of them, not romantic, but deeply bonded. 3 people who'd been lost in different ways, finding solid ground together. On the anniversary of that accidental text, December 23rd of the following year, Victoria called Marcus into her office, the Foundation's office now, smaller and warmer than her old corner suite, and she handed him an envelope. And inside was a Christmas card with that photo of young Victoria at the dig site, and she'd written, "Thank you for helping me find her again. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible even to myself. Thank you for being brave enough to answer a stranger's midnight. Wish with kindness you and Zoe are the best accident that ever happened to me. And I'm grateful every single day that I hit send on that text." Marcus felt his throat close up, and he pulled out the card he'd brought for her, and inside he'd written, "Thank you for proving that being seen doesn't mean being hurt, that vulnerability can lead to connection instead of pain, that some wishes are meant to be shared, even when we're afraid. You gave me my life back, Victoria. You gave Zoe a future, and you reminded me that the world still has magic if we're brave enough to reach for it." They stood there in comfortable silence, 2 people who understood each other in the way that only comes from having been broken and honest about it. And Victoria said, "Tell me your real wish," the question that had become their tradition, their code for truth-telling, and Marcus smiled. "My real wish is that everyone could have what we found," he said, "that everyone who feels invisible could have someone answer their midnight message with kindness. That loneliness didn't have to be a life sentence. That we could build a world where people see each other across all the things that divide us and choose connection anyway." And Victoria nodded, tears in her eyes. "That's my wish too," she said. "And Marcus, I think we're doing it, one person at a time, one story at a time. We're building that world." And he knew she was right. He could see it in the faces of the families they'd helped, in the community they were creating, in the way Zoe was growing up believing that people could be kind and brave, and that her voice mattered. And he thought about that accidental text, that moment of vulnerability that had changed everything. And he sent a silent thank you to the universe, or fate, or whatever force had made Victoria's fingers slip and send her loneliest moment to exactly the right person. Because that mistake had been the beginning of something beautiful. Proof that sometimes our deepest wishes are answered in the most unexpected ways. And that being seen, really truly, seen as the greatest gift we can give or receive. And that's a kind of magic that lasts far beyond Christmas. A kind of transformation that ripples out to touch everyone brave enough to whisper their real wish into the dark and wait for someone to whisper back, "I see you, and you're not alone."